I wanted today to be focused on stories. If you want to share, especially those of you who are a little older and have gone through several Saturnian periods in their lives, maybe you can share some interesting or I don't know, intense Saturn stories. Do you have any of those?
Yeah.
I can come up with one or two.
Okay.
Yeah, I certainly have a story or two.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Maybe you too, Raven. I know you have a very prominent.
I haven't, but you may have heard them all.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have chosen Alexander for the little example I wanted to give for the individual cycle of Saturn, because you are relatively young and you've only been through it once, not even once entirely. And it's probably, I thought maybe you won't have the stories as you haven't really lived through the drama yet, but I'll give the word to others to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, properly starting now, a little introduction from me, like always. I will be short this time, or at least I'll try, because I want to leave more time for conversation. And what I had in mind for today wasn't that much about Saturn in the birth chart, which we have spoken about before. And it's such a big thing. We always have to start from there and say a little bit about the position of Saturn in the chart, because it will make no sense if we jump straight into transits and the generic cycle. But I wanted to look at mainly two things about Saturn. The so-called generic cycle, which is the one we all have in common. That means Saturn starting its journey from the moment of birth and running through all the different stages and milestones in its 30-year cycle, and then repeating it twice, maybe 3 times if we're lucky to live up to 90. And this is the age-related cycle of Saturn. We going through different crises, different problems, different challenges related to this planet, which are connected to the age we are at that moment. So generic as it's for everyone. Similar, not the same, but we can expect similar things if we follow the sub-periods of 7 years that start from birth. So I will show you a little thing in a moment for this to make more sense, to be more visual. And then the second part, I want it to be about the individual cycle of Saturn, which is a totally different thing. It's not that much about the age we are at, but where Saturn is transiting the chart in the present moment and how it's traveling through the houses and the quadrants of the birth chart. So it really gets interesting when these two things somehow coincide every now and then. You know, it is possible for you to be going through a Saturn return, for example, and at the same time, Saturn may be transiting the chart in a way that it's activating a lot of things in there. Maybe it's also opposite your moon at that same moment, or it is crossing an angle because maybe you were born with Saturn on an angle in the first place. Maybe the most interesting and accentuated cases are those that we have someone born with Saturn on an angle. You know how the angles of the chart are those magnetic points that really make things very visible, very active, unavoidable in a way. Saturn in our birth chart is always unavoidable. We notice where it is. If you are still trying to decide what house system to use for your work or for your studies, and you're still not very convinced whether to go with the simplified equal house or maybe choose something else that splits the houses of the chart in a different way, I suggest, if you want to experiment, you can notice where the different systems are showing your Saturn to fall in a house, if there is any difference at all. You know, sometimes there can be a difference. I have my Saturn in the 7th house, and in certain systems, it moves to the 8th. But when you experiment, you would see maybe with the equal house and one of the not equal house systems, you have a different result. I think it's going to be quite straightforward to answer the question for yourself. Where really is Saturn in your case? Because I think we all share that same circumstance, that wherever Saturn is in the chart, this particular area suffers from some sort of inhibition. There is a binding situation there. There is something that we need to put up with. It doesn't need to be very dramatic. It could be a chronic state of pain related to the topic of that house. And it could be anything, because you know how broad these things are. But it is quite straightforward, I think, to see and answer. Is it in the 6th or is it in the 7th? Is it in the 1st or in the 2nd? You know, usually it's this delve between two houses where it could be. And especially if you're older, you are probably more familiar now with your Saturn, and you have seen it in action, and you have felt it in action, and you know that it is, even though I think, yes, it has this negative reputation most of the time, and we shouldn't stick to that, because to me, Saturn is the best teacher, the best growing up mechanism, maturing mechanism, or self-discovery mechanism, something that is actually there to help us. But maybe it is a cultural thing, maybe it's a generational thing, that we are still more into this framework of, if it doesn't feel good, it must be bad. It must be negative. Well, sometimes what doesn't feel good is exactly what we need in that moment, in order to then go to something that feels good later in a real way. As yes, Saturn is the reality planet, the physical, material, down to earth, and in that case, maybe a little bit limiting, yes, and constraint, and very often when we then expand into things like points of view, choices, and opinions about different matters, if Saturn is strong there, we may be quite limited in what we're able to see and perceive. But still, I suggest let's now today explore how maybe in the cycles of Saturn, we can cooperate with him in the moments when that's needed. And especially when we look later at the individual cycle, this traveling through the houses of the birth chart, I think the most important takeaway there is that simply when Saturn visits a house of the chart, we need to pay attention which things there require that we take responsibility personally for, and assume that responsibility. Don't run away from them. If it's the 10th house, we finally need to sit down and decide how we are going to work on our career choice, for example, or vocation, or maybe it could be also to do something to do with the parents' situation, which is also related to their house, whatever. But the point is, look there. If Saturn is there, just look there, and think of what you can do, just like voluntarily, rather than waiting for the energy to express itself naturally. If it's what we choose, then most likely we're not going to like it. It's going to present us with a situation when, want it or not, we would need to express it, but it will be frustrating and somehow unpleasant. So let's share the first slide. I only have 2 slides today. And the first one is the generic cycle. The second one is the individual cycle, just so that we can have a glimpse, put it all in perspective. Maybe some of you are more aware about all this and others are not that much. If you're interested, on my channel, I did maybe one of the very first lectures I did when I started my more serious work with astrology several years ago. It was a live lecture, so it is not the best audio, but it's like a recording of the meeting then. I did one talk about Saturn, the Saturn generic cycle, which is very detailed. I have individual videos about each one of the 7-year stages. So if you really want to delve deeper into this, you can listen to that in your own time. It's called the Saturn cycle, main life turning points. If you want to look for that, later on when we start talking, I will share it in the chat as a link so you can take a look. But I'm not going to go into such detail today because we won't have time. But I go there into each one of those ages, 7 to 14, 14 to 21, 21 to 30, and so on, all the way up to the 60s. And so just say what we can expect mostly there. Probably the best book that I would recommend, and I'm sure some of you know it, is this one, Cycles of Becoming by Alexander Ruperti. How many of you know it and have read it, or some of it? You, Simona? Yes, I know you know that one. We've mentioned before. This is probably the best book about cycles in general, and it covers the Saturn cycle, both of them, and it also has these combinations: the Saturn-Jupiter cycle, the Saturn-Uranus cycle. It's a really powerful book, and you know that Alexander Ruperti was a student of Dane Rudhyar, and most of what he's talking about here really follows Rudhyar's theory, but it's a very easy to read book. It's not difficult at all. It's not the same style as Rudhyar by any means, and it really is like a handbook for cycles. Indispensable. I took it with me. Yes?
Sorry, what's his last name, Radalina?
Alexander Ruperti. Ruperti.
Thank you.
Cycles of Becoming. I think this is his only book, but it's one of my favorite books of astrology. I mean, at all. And I even ended up taking it with me from Valencia in my packing because I really couldn't, risk not having it on my side when I need it.
You can have two.
Yes, but it's so difficult to find because it's out of print. That's the thing. Otherwise, I think you can still buy it online, but it's getting more difficult to find it. So if you can get your hands on it, I really recommend it. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the slides. This is just a glimpse on this generic cycle of Saturn. So what are we talking about here? The time it takes this planet to make one whole circle around the zodiac, or one whole circle around the sun. This is, of course, from our perspective. We are watching it from here on Earth, and we can see how it gradually moves counterclockwise in the zodiac, and in approximately 30 years, 29 and a bit, it returns back to the same position where it started from. And we all experience this in the same way, because the counting starts from birth. And then when we are around 30 years old, we have the first Saturn return. Then at around 60, we have the second Saturn return. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have the third Saturn return at 90. So I've given you the dates here just to make it easier. These are the different approximate ages when Saturn goes through the 4 main turning points of its cycle. You know, every cycle has these 4 main steps. We don't have to necessarily start from the ascendant here. Even though this circle looks a little bit like a chart, it's not a chart, it's just like on this side where I say Saturn conjunct Saturn, we are just using this as a starting point. That's where it all begins. And then we go that way, downwards basically, to the first square of Saturn to itself, to its natal position. Then we go to the opposition and the second square. We have spoken about this before extensively when we covered the lunation cycle, that whatever cycle we are talking about, it is extremely important to remember that the first square and the second square are not the same. Yes, they are moments of difficulty, of really turning, making a U-turn maybe, or really going into another direction, having to do that, having to readjust something, usually under stress from outside. But in the first case, with the waxing square, which is the one after the conjunction. So the very first one we experience, the one we experience when we are between 6 and 8 years old. So it's the 7th year, more or less, for everybody. That's when Saturn is at 45 degrees to, 90 degrees from where it was at birth. And it is making the first square. But that's a difficulty which is related to acting out in the world, doing something, being obstructed in our movement, in our desire to be out there and achieve something. It's very actional in its nature, a bit Martian, we can say, this kind of challenge. While the second one, which happens after the opposition, there we are 21 years old in the first time around, 21, 22, something like that. Then we're dealing with something else, reconsideration of what happened so far, having to change because we are now thinking in a different way. We are now having this crisis of consciousness, as the Inward calls it. So it's not about action anymore. It's about reconsideration. And yeah, it can be equally hard, but usually we're not that much attacked from outside, and we need to be there and do something rather than we need to actually put to the test whether things are working with Saturn or are not since the cycle began, and what needs to be amended if we want to move forward. So I hope that makes sense, that these two squares, and that holds true with any cycle of any planet, that whatever that planet is about, in the first challenge, we are we're closer to the beginning. So we are still like young children testing ourselves. Well, the second one is a bit more mature. We already quite experienced in what this Saturnian cycle was giving us as a task. And now we need to reform it a little bit, or we need to put it to a different kind of test. So the opposition is this midpoint of the cycle. You know how we also need to bear in mind that everything starts and ends, but also has this peak in the middle, where it's really getting clear what that is all about. And if we want to see it, of course, the crisis of the opposition is different from that of the squares, as it is mostly to do with consciously realizing where we stand about the issue. You know, I know here we're still very abstract because we're not giving any examples, but whatever the difficulty of Saturn that started in the beginning of the cycle, in the middle of the cycle, we really have the chance to face it directly. And like we see the full moon when it's exactly full in the middle of the cycle of the moon, in the same way we can maybe say we can see our Saturn then for what it really is and what it's trying to tell us, and then realize how to move forward. This is usually a scary moment, as there is nowhere to hide. There are things that come to the surface, which if we're not pleased with them, they may be very difficult, almost like you are blinded by a very, very direct and intense light that comes to your face without expecting it. So something like this. But here with this following our course of life cycle, and you know how Saturn is the ruler of all cycles. I thought we should start from him if we are to talk about the planetary cycles and transits of other planets maybe later. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. I think that would be very interesting for next week's if you guys are interested. But why we begin from Saturn? Because I think this is the most fundamental one. That's like the building block of growing up and then growing old, the symbol of time, the symbol of aging, and all the challenges and all the difficulties that we face as we gradually go through the different stages. People have been using Saturn ever since there is astrology to measure human life. I know nowadays it is a little bit being replaced by Uranus when we measure the actual lifetime of a human being, because age expectancy is increasing and we no longer expect to live around 60 years. We see that it's very likely that most people today may reach 84, which is the cycle of Uranus, and many new topics come to the surface. Uranus is really taking over and maybe mixing up with Saturn, but it's not that much about the physical survival, the material well-being only. But with Uranus, we are getting into a different territory as well, about those other crises of breaking through the norms of Saturn and overcoming the limitations of Saturn. But anyway, we're not talking about Uranus today. Let's go back to Saturn. And here I just wanted to ask you, when we start the discussion, looking at these ages in the table, are you at one of those ages right now? I think some of you are.
Yeah.
How are you experiencing it? And if this is the second time around, you are at this peak age of a square or an opposition or a return, whatever, what was it like the last time around? As before we start speaking about this, maybe remind ourselves that we always need to start from the chart. Where is Saturn starting that journey from in your chart? Which house? In what aspects is it in the birth chart? Is it in a stressful relationship to other planets? Or is it relatively left alone? Is it, in what quadrant of the chart did it start the journey from? I have it in the 7th. So when I have the return, when I had the return a few years back, I think I'm still like in the last stages of the return, because after we have one of those phases here exact, I think we can say that all the 7 years after the thing is exact, we are still under the influence of this particular aspect. For example, when you have your Saturn return at 30, from 30 to 37, this particular thing is ongoing, this theme. And I would expect that my issues will be related to one-to-one relationships. It will be a Saturnian experience for everyone at that age. But in my case, specifically, it has to be focused in this area. And it has been focused in this area. I mean, it always comes as a very accurate clock, measuring not just what is supposed to be the transition in general in that age, but also it inevitably hits us where we are vulnerable. And we are all vulnerable in one way or another in that area of life where Saturn is at birth. So I would leave you later to just tell us anything that you think from your own experience could be relevant to making this come to life. Then finally here on this one, I want to say this thing that Dane Ruggier is repeating a lot in his articles, books, and so on about the Saturnian revolution around the chart and so on, that it is conveniently splitting life into 3 main stages: from birth to 30, from 30 to 60, from 60 to 90. And these 3 big periods could be compared to something like a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis of life. Or we can say it in another way. From birth to 30, we are more in the past. We're dealing with our past conditioning. You know that Saturn stands for everything inherited from family, from culture, from the circumstances, all of those things that we have to take for granted when we're born because they're just there. And we happen to have been born at this place, at that time, with these people. And this is the unescapable circumstance of Saturn. Presumably, the main idea of the first part of the cycle, from birth to 30, is to make peace, understand as much as we possibly can our relationship with our cultural conditioning, our family, our parents, particularly, especially, whatever the situation was there, and somehow try to distinguish between what we feel about different things in life and ourselves, and what these things are trying to tell us to feel about these things, how we are conditioned and how we are affected by society and parents mostly. And then something really needs to change around the 30th year. There needs to be some sort of click, switch, readjustment, which even if all of those issues are still not completely overcome, we need to now start standing up on our own 2 feet and making choices. It's a moment of choice at the 30th year, where we need to pick and choose from all the available options, narrow them down, and decide on a particular thing or several but small number of things to dedicate ourselves to. And the more this is chosen, personally, the more this is likely to work out for us in the next period. The 30s are considered to be the beginning of the productive years. We could have been making all sorts of experiments, and this is the natural thing to do in the first cycle. Trial and error is totally permitted and all right. And it all actually depends at the end of the day in what kind of situations we have involved ourselves in the 20s. Whether we have gone into an early marriage, for example, whether we have had children early, whether we've started something as a job, for example, whatever, which was binding quite a lot. It's quite important how far away from ourselves we went in the 20s without even knowing it most of the time. That's going to determine how hard the Saturn return is going to hit us. So it hits very hard those people that did a lot of things, a lot of choices, or kind of opted for lots of situations that were not very much in tune with their actual being and their actual nature. And this always turns back to bite or to, give us a hard time later. Every step of Saturn, all of those mini 7-year periods or the big ones at every 30 years are yet another chance to deal with the issues. And if we miss the point at any of those transition points and we don't do it, next time around it's twice harder or 3 times harder and so on and so forth. So this is just a thing to have in mind. But then really, we don't need to be too worried about not having achieved everything we dreamt for until the 30th year, as what this whole cycle is meant to teach us is that it all begins at 30 in a way. The conscious is like a second birth, how Roger calls it, potential for a second birth. There's no guarantee that's going to happen, but we can rediscover ourselves in a way. And even though inevitably at the returns, there is this nagging feeling of depressive limitation and things ending and really being, maybe for the first time realizing we are aging Saturn style, then at the same time, there is a bit of relief at the 30th year and then at the 60th year as we feel a new liberty coming to us as well, and ability to now do things from another perspective, at another level. And so, yes, it's then important to find a way to be productive, to be participating in society in a meaningful way from 30 to 60, and then enter the last cycle in a way, hopefully, which makes us aware that at 60, there is yet another cycle to live through, that nothing is really ending there, that even though we are aging and things are starting to hurt physically most of the time, the body is not in its shape the way it was in the previous years. It's starting to give signs of trouble and so on, and many other things are happening which are very, very disturbing around the 60th year, and many people go into very hard depressive periods. But I think there are a lot of things that we can say about this crucial point. I know we don't have so much time, but maybe the greatest lesson here is to go through this and then continue after the 60s, taking yourself a little bit away from material, physical action and looking more inward. Looking for your own spirituality and wisdom and how you can maybe somehow give away the wisdom to others, especially younger people. Get into the role of the wise elder in one way or another. And this is probably the best way to live through the third cycle. But if we are trying to push too much about this glorified productivity and physical strength of the previous one, which is really necessary and really natural for between 30 and 60, then most of the time we're going to be disappointed, frustrated, and so on. So if you guys have stories about your transitioning of those major return points, that would be very interesting to hear later. That's the other way to look at Saturn's transitions. And maybe most astrologers follow that more. The other one is a bit neglected most of the time. But if you are consulting people, you know very well, I'm sure, that whatever the question of the client is that comes to you for advice, whatever they're dealing with, if you check the chart and you realize they are having a Saturn return, opposition, or square, this is crucial information for you to know. You need to have at the back of your mind always that they are at this stage at the moment, because that's inevitably going to be a big part of why they called you at this moment, what they need and what they're struggling with, even if they don't know it. So the generic cycle, the previous one, was something that we need to have in mind. So always check. So at what age is this person? Yeah, the chart is the chart, and it's always going to be like that because the chart never changes. But what's going on with them internally is very connected to the age factor. This thing here is not connected to the age factor. It's the so-called individual cycle of Saturn. Saturn traveling in the sky, doing its thing, going around the sun, and constantly affecting all of us through transits. So transits are outside challenges which are trying to somehow disturb the integrity of our system, of our chart, of our personality, and to give us wake-up calls sometimes hardships. Usually Saturn acts slowly. You know, it stays in one sign of the zodiac for about 2.5 years. Actually, exactly 2.5 years, even though it goes retrograde every now and then, and we need to know that it's not going to be exactly very accurate every time if we count that. But you know, in general terms, every month we can expect Saturn to be at a different degree of the zodiac. So if you're using the Sabian symbols, for example, you can even experiment with that and say, okay, let's see where Saturn is now for every one of us, the transiting one, at what degree of the zodiac and what's the symbol there. So what can we all expect from Saturn? But where is it going to affect us personally? And this is why I don't really like those astrological podcasts, columns, articles, whatever it may be, people speaking on the internet that are saying Saturn or whatever other planet is there now, so we can expect this and this. Who are we, is my question. Every single person will be affected differently. Depends on where is Saturn in your natal chart and where it falls by house when it's transiting. All we can speak about generally is social trends. You know, Saturn is a social planet at the end of the day. It's to do with what goes on out there in society and its institutions, its governing bodies, its system as a whole. That's what the general transit can give us some clues about. But when we speak about ourselves, then we need to look at it in another way. And basically, it all begins for us when Saturn, for the first time, crosses our ascendant. This is the beginning, the starting point. And we experience that first challenge from Saturn at a different age. Everyone at a different age. So, for example, because I have Saturn in the 7th, you know, the 7th is pretty much opposite side from the first and from the ascendant. Saturn takes 30 years to go around the whole chart. So roughly, we can expect that it would take my Saturn 15 years, pretty much, or more or less, half of the time it takes to go around, to travel all the way from where it starts in the 7th house in my chart to the ascendant. So we can say that for the first time I meet Saturn in a way that I can now take whatever this represents and use it consciously in my own way. Was around my teenage years, around 14, 15 years old. But what if you are born with Saturn in the 12th house? Then very shortly after birth, it's going to cross your ascendant. So you're going to start that journey earlier in your life. If Saturn is in your 1st house, very close to the ascendant in the 1st house, it's already crossed it when you were born, you will need to wait almost 30 years before you start really utilizing your Saturn. This is the general rule. So that's very interesting, isn't it? If you think about it in your own case, when did it happen for the first time for you? And we can also imagine that all those years before that, from birth to the first time it crosses the ascendant, we were somehow in the dark with Saturn. We were more subject to it than cooperating with it. Maybe we were cooperating unconsciously, but we were in a way conditioned by all those things that I mentioned before are typical for the first cycle of life, birth to 30. So we can guess, I'm not sure, Alexander Ruperti is saying that in his book, but I'm not sure, maybe we all need to test it, that the earlier this happens, the crossing of the ascendant, the more adept the person becomes using Saturn. The more you can, from early on, start understanding how to guide the process, how to, in a way, navigate your own growing up rather than being constantly reactive to what's going on around you, and being like in a struggle to overcome limiting conditions or your relationship with parents or something like this. But at the end of the day, we know that the chart is what it's supposed to be. Our case is what we needed and what maybe we can say the world needed through us. So whatever is your case, this was going to be the normal thing for you. But sometimes when Saturn crosses the ascendant for the first time late in life, it becomes a bigger shock, a bigger reality check, something that we really don't know how to deal with initially. So that's the other question I have for you. What's your situation? And did you, I was thinking of calculating for today for every one of you when that happened, but it takes such a long time even for solar fire to calculate it, that I only picked Alexander, and I did your 4 points. So they are like this in your case, and I will show the chart. We'll start with that chart just so we have some illustration. But here we had, you were born in, remind me, 1993, was it?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So, and you have in your chart Saturn, where was Saturn in your chart?
In Aquarius, 2nd house.
In the 2nd house.
Yeah.
So, okay, the dates are this way because you obviously had to wait a long time. You're one of those that almost very, very recently you had Saturn cross your ascendant. You have a Capricorn ascendant. So the first time it crossed an angle after birth, because it starts from the 2nd house, you were born in 1983. In 1993. In 1999, it crossed the IC, the first angle. Then it will do that again in 2028, which is not very far away from now. So that's why I just made a note of that here. But then the next time it crossed an angle, the 7th house one, was in 2003. We're going like in 5 years intervals, if you notice. So from 1993 to 1999, now 2003 is when it crossed the descendant. Then in 2012, it crossed the 10th house cusp, DMC.
Yeah.
And finally, February 2018 was that thing that I'm talking about, the crossing of the ascendant. So only 3 years ago. So
Yeah.
this is your case, and you guys can calculate the same thing for yourself. If you're using Solar Fire, there is a search engine there, maybe you know, where you can say, pick that chart, your chart, for example, show me on the radix chart or the natal chart, Saturn crossing, and you can do that with every single cusp of every house. So you can say crossing the first, the second, the third, and so on. And some time ago, I was even thinking of doing a separate kind of consultation for people, which is only Saturn based, because Saturn is so fundamental that we can say that we can expect that every time it crosses a cusp of a house, not simply an angle, but every single cusp, we can expect something to be happening and something to be challenging that person. And it's important to make a note of those years of your life, like make a timetable. So I used to print out an empty chart, like a wheel with divided in 12 houses and only that. And I was calculating or using, you can use an ephemeris or you can use a software to save time, but you can calculate for yourself when those dates are, when Saturn crosses each one of the houses. And you would notice if you're using one of those houses which are time-based or space-based, not equal, if you use one of the other houses, you would see that it's not always the same thing, that you spend, say, 2 years in your second house with Saturn, but then you spend 4 years in your third house or something like that, because some houses are bigger than others, and it takes, obviously, Saturn shorter or longer to go through them. So this whole thing is making the Saturnian influence very individual. Again, yeah, in another way, it's very person-specific now. And that can be a very interesting framework to study a person's life. And if you are giving them advice, to say, okay, now look at this, look at that area, concentrate here, do what you need to do here, because it's important, don't miss the opportunity, and so on. Or when they're experiencing hardship there, which is really difficult to handle, you can say, that's why this is normal for that stage of your life. See what you can take away from this as lessons, but keep in mind it's temporary. And once it moves on and goes to the next house and the next house, things are going to shift. So yeah, we can see how through this one, we have the gradually developing self. And we can use the two ones, the generic and the individual, together and see where we stand at each one of them. Yeah? Maybe I should stop here with this introduction. I think you get the idea. Any questions? Anything you want to comment?
To what extent does the crossing of the IC, or MC compensates for not having the crossing of the ascendant yet?
You mean before it happens for the first time, the ascendant one?
Yeah.
I was thinking the same, and I don't know, maybe it does have an effect, because at the end of the day, it's an angle, but maybe, just a theory, maybe, say in my case, the first angle that was crossed was the MC before the ascendant. Something around the MC is accentuated, but I don't have a lot of control on that. It's more from outside. It's more so it's still a very charged MC situation, but maybe, say I was a kid at the time, I was what, 7 years old or something. Maybe we can argue that in such a case, the person will be offered an experience to study something or to learn about something, or maybe the parent shows you something or something like that, that can later become a part of what you're going to do for a living, or what you're going to choose as a profession in the next cycle when you're already an adult. Maybe some seed is being planted there at that moment. But the idea with the individual cycle of Saturn is actually the seed is planted for the first time when it crosses the ascendant. I'm not sure about all this. This is what the books say. And maybe we can see that there is a way to start using it before it crosses the ascendant. Depends what importance you give to the ascendant and whether you really believe that this is the starting point of everything for us and our ability to deal with something consciously. What if the sun is before that somewhere? What if you have the sun in one of the houses before the ascendant and Saturn crosses, like transits over your sun before it crosses the ascendant? Maybe we can argue that that's going to be a starting point too, in another way. Well, actually, maybe it's worth mentioning before I stop talking, this final bit of the picture, what Saturn does to our planets. So it's not only traveling through the houses, but also we have planets in the houses. And when we have the situation when, for example, Saturn is making one of those four aspects, the two squares, the opposition or the conjunction to Sun or Moon, the main players, or the personal planets, or itself, or Jupiter, then this is going to be a very important thing as well. Even if this is happening in the middle of its going through a house, for example. It's not on an angle, but it's hitting my sun, or it's hitting my moon, or the Venus, or whatever. And at the moment, for example, I have Saturn square Mercury, and that's a very tangible transit, extremely tangible. Usually, Saturn transits are the most tangible, as this is the most embodied planet. It is something that you cannot not perceive. It is physical, it is material, it is obvious. So anyway, it's interesting how this same, we start from day one with something, say the relationship between Saturn and your sun, and them two form a pair at that moment, and they go through one cycle of relationship between them two. Then we can do that with Saturn, pairing it with every other planet and seeing how it is interacting with it. You know, when you open a birth chart, you start studying it for the first time, you can say to yourself, let's see what is the cyclic relationship between each two planets in that chart. So this person, where are his sun and moon standing to one another? Where are they in their cycle? Where are his Saturn and Sun? Where are his Saturn and Jupiter? You know, it's any combination you can make. And you would discover that each one of those planets will be at a different step of their couple cycle. And this means something in the interpretation of the chart, obviously. So yeah, it's already sounding very complicated. So I hope we can sum it up this way. Saturn, first, where is it in the chart? What house, what sign, what aspects? Then when we see this, we look at the generic one, what we experience through it in each of the steps through life, through the ages of life, especially at 30 and at 60. And the midpoints, 15, 45, and so on. And then this one, the individual, how at any moment as an external factor, as an attack from outside, in a way, Saturn is giving us challenges and giving us things to work on and to establish for ourselves. And yeah, the lessons of the old wise teacher, that's what it's supposed to be with Saturn. It's not always the case, but that's what we're hoping for. And now I leave it all to you. Let's start a conversation and you tell me where you want to start from. If anyone wants to begin with an example, go ahead.
Yeah. You privilege the Aries ones.
I thought
What
you
was
were
that,
going to
Shana?
start with the chart of, I thought you were going to start with the chart
Yes.
of Alexander.
Good point, Lauren. Yeah, I actually, yes, I forgot that this is what I intended to do. So maybe begin this way. Let's just share them for you. Right. Do you see it?
No, no, no.
You will any moment now.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes, we do.
Oh, now Zoom is giving us a little note. It's giving me a note that now the other participants can see my screen, which is very helpful. I won't need to ask you all the time if you're seeing it. Okay, so Alexander, is that the correct chart? I hope I haven't made a mistake or something. I always like it when new Scorpios are joining the group, so I'm a bit prejudiced because I'm a Scorpio too, and
oh, nice.
yes, so is Jean-Marc, and so is Sam. But yeah, by no means we're not just a Scorpio group. It's just yeah, a mix. But okay, well, let's see what we've got here. You recently had your Saturn return, the first one.
Well, it's coming. No?
Actually, yes, it's not there yet.
Yeah,
You are about to have it. That's right. And can you say that you're already feeling this?
Slowly, yes, but I feel it coming. Yeah.
Can you show where it is, Radalina, with your
Yes.
pointer?
So we have Saturn in the second house in Aquarius.
Okay.
So that's where it's returning to. Now we also have Saturn in Aquarius, but it's more in the beginning of Aquarius. So that's right. You are already in the how can I say, around it. And Saturn doesn't start its effect when it's exact. It's a longer period. And maybe we can fairly say that we can even start counting from the 27th year when we have other things going on, like the return of the progress moon to its same place. And I don't know how much you guys are into progressions as well, but just to mention that Saturn is a very interesting coincidence with the progress moon in terms of how long it takes both of them to go through the zodiac and the chart. They take almost the same time. So 28 to 30 years in both cases. The progress moon and Saturn, they're totally different. They have nothing to do with one another, but they have similar cycles. So every person experiences return of the progress moon about the 27th, 8th year. And I think this is something like a warm-up for the Saturn return. And then it really becomes intense exchanges around 29, 30. And do you know that there is such a thing as a repeated return? When you are 32, 3, 4, something like this, it almost feels like it comes back in a way. These same feelings, these same issues that you went through when the return was exact, same as after the 60s. This is to do with the solar arc. Now, I'm sorry if this is too much info, but if you're using solar arc and progressions, you know that Saturn in these two things there is taking not 30 but in 32 years to move to. So basically the transiting Saturn is catching up with the progressed Saturn, which has already moved a little bit forward. So at age 32, 33, you've got the transiting Saturn on top of your solar arc or progressed or maybe both Saturns, which is something like an imitation of a real return. But it's the explanation behind why some people struggle with the same thing. And they're saying, was that not supposed to be over by that time? By the time I'm 33, 4 or 63, 4? Why am I dealing with the same situation again? That's why, because it's kind of repeating.
At the same time, if they're dealing with it again, they didn't really deal with it the first time. It's like a remember a little bit.
Possibly, it's giving you like a chance to finish the task if you haven't yet, something like that. So how do you feel about your Saturn return?
Well, I just learned about all the generic cycles, and I could make sense of all of it, I guess, a lot. But now it's really, well, for me, it's really about individualization, because I feel the Aquarius energy is really there. And with the rest of the chart, it's really a problem for me to just be myself and don't care too much about what others think and everything. With the Leo moon and all the Scorpio, that's still wants some bounding and everything. So I think this Saturn is really for me like letting go of what others think and really being myself, my fullest self. Also, yeah.
We can see that your Saturn is under a lot of pressure to start with because it's got so many squares and other aspects. And it's supposed to be a more sensitive one than in
It's
most cases.
my ruler, yeah.
It's also the ruler of the ascendant, yes. Saturn is a very big factor in that chart. I think it is squaring the sun, even though it's 9 degrees, but I think it still counts 9 degrees. You see here the table, hopefully can show you guys when we follow Saturn here, we can see what's going on. But Saturn square Mars and Saturn square the sun. This is the two so-called male planets in the chart. You are a man, and I suppose Saturn is causing quite a lot of trouble in one way or another. And in the second house, almost everybody I know with Saturn in the second house has experienced material difficulties when they were growing up. Is that your case?
Yeah, it definitely.
So yeah, usually the money situation around the parents and where you lived, in what house, was it easy to survive basically? That's always an issue, and maybe that's going to be the challenge of how to put a solid base for yourself now when you're entering the 30s and kind of take responsibility for your own well-being materially.
Well, exactly. That's when it crosses my IC. That's when I really started to build something for myself. My process of individualization really started because I left my birth city and did things for myself to
So
heal
you're saying that,
from all of it.
are you saying that you started working with it? You can see when I gave you the dates, the years, that actually this whole thing started acting even before it crossed the ascendant for the first time.
Well, it was really chaotic before the the waning square when I was 21, 22. That's really when I realized I needed change because everything was really crazy. And I had a big experience which really made me realize everything needed to change a little bit. So,
And is it coming out as some sort of difficulty in that area now?
Now it's getting stabilized, really. The material, you mean, like having a material security and everything, it's really stabilizing with me.
Right. And I know that you're probably too young to really know Saturn very well yet, but I guess this is one of the most important moments now to make any decisions that you need to make about these things. And they would be experimented with in the next 7 years. So I don't think we should assume that we have to solve it all at 30 or during the actual return. I think a decision just needs to be made at the return, maybe some new direction, a new dedication, but we're not yet there. We haven't, it's still the very beginning of a cycle. And it's very unclear when it's the beginning of a cycle. It's like a new moon. We can't see anything there. So I think that's what many people miss. They push themselves too much to solve the situation at 30 or 60 or whenever and just close the door behind and move on to something. But actually, I discovered I recently went through my first Saturn return, 34 now, and it felt like, yes, a lot of things to throw away, to finally say that this is not serving me, that's not working. Have the courage, and Saturn in general is so much about courage to face something and to make the decision, whatever that is. And then when you choose, I chose what I'm going to do, but it's still in the making. How? And I still don't know if it's working. I still don't know if it's ever going to work properly. Whether maybe when the 7th year comes, I would make another turn. It's going to be another square in 7 years. So whether you can decide then, well, yeah, I thought that would be the thing, but I would change strategy again. So yeah, I think we shouldn't be very fatalistic about the return. What would you guys say? Anyone else that has been through this, and what did you experience when you were tell Alexander, if you have to, those of you that are older, if you have to give him an advice about the first Saturn return, what would that be?
Buckle up. Well, you know, I wish there was a way to animate the charts so you could see the Saturn going around and see his experiences at the different ages. When I think about my own chart, it's like every 7 years lit up something, and it still seems really abstract to me looking at it without knowing what he experienced at the ages and where the planets were at that time.
That's one of the
But that's
challenges.
just me, because I'm a beginner, really.
No, it's everybody, I think. I'm totally confused too, because this thing takes time. It takes a bit more work, doesn't it? I decided today deliberately not to use the software directly as I was before. This is like a snapshot of the chart as an image, because I was afraid that the connection is not going to hold well. Otherwise, we can animate the chart, and we can, even if you want, we can try to do that. It's going to be interesting, but it's going to be I think it will be more confusing at the end of the day for all of you.
Probably.
Because if you want to have like examples, if you are, one of those that has gone through those stages and you know your dates, you can say at this date, at this like turning point, that's what happened, and then the next one and the next one. But
the urge to go and work out, because on the previous slide where you had all of the age sections, I was looking at that thinking, well, that happened in my life at that point, and that happened in my life at that point, and that happened in my life. Yes. And so now I feel the urge to go and plonk it in and actually have a look, because all of the major things, from my mum leaving to being my dad's carer and him dying, the marriage I didn't want to be in, to the marriage I managed to get out for my Saturn return, up to including getting into astrology and tarot, are all sitting there. It's like, oh shit. They're sitting there staring at me in those date frames.
Shall we go back to the table?
They were all on that table.
Yes, let's go back to, I knew that you're gonna like the table because it's so handy, isn't it? And reminds us which ages. What I really like about it, let me see if I can bring it back. Has anything changed on your side, or I've just changed it here?
Just you at the moment.
Okay. Obviously, every time it needs to be restarted. Now. Okay. I like that it's not just, it's giving us the ages at the different, the first time, the second time, the third time, in a way. You see, the waxing square, for example, I don't know, I'm not yet there at 36, 37, but I guess whatever happens then will still have something to do with whatever was my circumstance when I was 7 years old.
When I was 5, 6, my mum walked out and she left. So it was just me and my dad. When I was 14, 15, he became very unwell. I was his main carer. He died when I was 16. When I was 21, I got married. I didn't want to get married. Ended up just doing it. Peer pressure, kind of got along. It was quite abusive, mentally abusive relationship. 28 to 30 was when we'd split up, and I was gathering resources, trying to get money, trying to get out. I left behind so much, but I just had to get out. 36 to 37 was when I discovered tarot. It's when I started doing astrology. It's when I started doing Reiki, and I've suddenly started to live. So I'm kind of really looking forward to actually for the 43, 44 now, because it does seem like the first lot were crap. And now it's sort of like, well, perhaps it's a better version. I mean, as a kid, I always had the imaginary friend that I now know isn't an imaginary friend. It was spirit and stuff like that. So when I was 5'6", it was put down to imagination. 36, 37, I now know there's something more to it. So it'd be interesting to see if 14, 15, being my dad's carer, resenting it because I was a teenager, and losing your freedom and everything like that, and then him passing away, see if there's more positive aspect at 43, 44 that links to that event. It'll be kind of fun to look at. But I now want to go back because, of course, mine still started in Libra. My Saturn's in Libra, along with Pluto, because it sits on top of one another. And it would be interesting to actually go back now, and I want to plot them and try and work out which signs and which houses they all fell in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, some maybe
my project for the next couple of weeks.
yes, I was going to urge you all to do that project, and maybe I should have, but it was not easy to explain before today, and just in the announcement for the
I don't think
event.
I'd have understood it without seeing that breakdown that you
Yes.
put there. I don't think I would have completely twigged just from a verbal description.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's a bit complicated, which is this can be such a powerful tool to investigate your life and your stages, but it's not easy to work with it and work with the client because you need to give all this introduction about why this is important in the first place. I want to show you a chart quickly.
And also, I would like to just add that what seems so important, I can do the same thing of just delineate the very big things that happened at that time. But I think it's important to do what you had said of just, you look at the Saturn, where is it and how does it really affect you? And with that as a big focal, as well as what are its aspects in this lifetime? So how is that Saturn going to show up? And because, just through the dates, I could make up a story very easily of the big dramas that happened, but or the big stages, whatever. But to know the aspects and its own quality. Well, Saturn in Libra, a lot of us had that. But anyway, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of distinguishing what is our particular Saturn in our chart. What are its qualities? How is it going to show up?
And especially which house it is in, I would add here, Lauren, because you see here, I think you already noticed probably how your stories, all those stages, they were just not only stages of difficulty, but what kind of difficulty? It was definitely related to
family.
All begins from the
Family,
fourth house. Yeah, it makes total sense, doesn't it? The carer situation then later on coincided probably with the period when Saturn was between the 6th and the 7th, and then the 8th house. And everything is like totally making sense if we follow it also through the houses at the same time. So that's how it becomes really magical and useful. The two cycles combine together, the generic and the individual. And always remember where we all started. So the main problem from the beginning was sorting out some family drama, and your early family one, then your own family one, and now maybe things are going to get clearer and clearer as time goes by. When did you say, so let's see roughly, when did it cross the ascendant? At what age?
It's right at the bottom, so it'll be about
Saturn in Cancer. When did we have Saturn in Cancer? So exactly 15 years ago, pretty much, because now it's in Capricorn.
Yeah.
And last time it was in Cancer, it was 15 years ago. So I guess that's when, for the first time, your Saturn crossed your ascendant. Does that make any sense to you?
I'd have to ponder on it.
Okay, never mind.
And how do we quickly get to when our Saturn crossed the ascendant? I'm not quite sure how that worked.
Well, it's very difficult. I used to do it in the hardest possible way, like Saturn way. I was looking at ephemeris, and I look at the ascendant sign in degree, and the question is really, when was Saturn there? That's when it crossed the ascendant. When was it in Cancer in this case? And I roughly calculate, oh, it must have been around this year. I opened ephemeris. It turns out it's not exactly that year, it's the next one or the previous one. And then I just go through the tables. Now that I have Solar Fire, the software, it's all much quicker, because maybe I should try. I see my connection is so much better today, and I should try showing you how to do this, because it's so easy, and I'm sure you're going to use it a lot.
Yeah, yeah, good idea, Radalina.
I would like to see it myself, because I think that's, you know, this is like opening up something, and it needs to be explored, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to explore it.
Okay.
Yeah, what you can do is you learn the ephemeris by heart. From 1960 to 2020.
Okay.
Is that how you master Saturn?
And then you look at the chart and you know.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
So if someone can do that, they're the master astrologer. Is that the case?
Yeah.
Okay, I just opened it. I will share with you in a sec. Just want to open somebody's chart as a. Let's open Sam's chart. Okay, I know you still don't see it. I will share in a second. Okay. Now this is so this is my Solar Fire as a start. I've opened her chart here. So you just select the chart from the list and you go up here. I just remove the controls. Do you see this binoculars?
Yeah.
But there are two. There are one here and one here. So it's this second one here. When you go there, I really love this. I discovered recently what this program can do, and it's such a tool. So it gives you this thing through which you can do all sorts of research. But what we are interested in, you go here in the menu, you see all those things you can choose from. You go to in-house. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In-house. Now, it's important to remove everything from this part here so that you start from scratch. Because I have been doing some checks before, there is something there. So you say delete, and here is nothing now. Then the next step, I need to change the place, because the reference place, because you were not born in the same place where I was. So where were you born, Sam? Again?
Portsmouth, UK.
Portsmouth. Okay. So here I changed to, is it spelled like that? Yeah. Okay. So United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Right. We're good to go with the place. Now, what are we looking for? Here, transiting point in or cusp. You choose Saturn from the menu. Then you choose first house, for example. You can choose all the houses. Or you can choose angular, which will give you results for all the 4 houses in one go. But this can be more confusing. So let's do just the first house. And here you have to have opted for of radix chart, because that's a natal chart, isn't it? I think this is the default, so you don't need to really do anything, but just make sure. So the place of birth has to be correct. What we're looking for in house, Saturn in the first house in the radix chart. And now you click add here, add, so that we say to the program, this is what I want you to search for. Yeah. And then we just hit search. But we need to wait a little bit. We have to talk to each other before we get the result, because now it's calculating. And it's going to give us every time this happens. Yeah, so you even see the dates later in life when that's going to be. And this is amazing, isn't it? Because you can just make a list quickly and see where these points fall. It gives you the date, not just the year. It gives you on what date the aspect was exact for the first time, when it went there, when then it left and came back because we see that Saturn is doing what it's doing around 2 years. And because it also goes retrograde, you often have that situation when it crosses your ascendant, stays in the first house for a while, then goes back to the 12, then crosses the ascendant again, and it's kind of playing with your ascendant for a while. Yeah, so yes. Okay, I'll come back to this when it's ready, and I'll show you what the result is. Okay? Any questions about the whole way of how to do this?
Would it be easy for you to just say the steps again? Because I got
Yeah.
lost.
Of course.
It's so tiny on my screen.
Sure, no problem, Raven. So first of all, you open, I'm not going to close this because I don't want to stop the search.
Right.
But you just click on the chart that you want to work with first. Then remember, we're going to have a recording of this, so you don't need to remember all of that. Just go back to the recording. But
Right.
you click on the chart, then you go to the binoculars here on the top, the ones with the timer.
Oh, okay.
Then they would give you this window. That
Okay.
one. Oh, sorry. This window. And here, there are so many things we can search for that chart.
Right.
And you choose in-house because you're looking to find when this planet or something was to do with the houses. You know, you're looking for something in house position. Because we can also search, for example, when was Saturn in Cancer? Or, yeah, and it will show us those. But here we're looking for, we choose first of all what. We can look for another planet as well, but here you choose Saturn. And then you choose the house cusp that you're interested in. And you make sure that of radix chart is chosen here. And then when you are ready with all those things.
And you changed the location too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Make sure that the location is correct. I guess this is not going to make a big difference, even if you forget about that.
Okay.
Because this is not very location sensitive thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess there will be a bit of difference in dates when Saturn was exactly crossing, but the years will be, the months and years will be the same, and that's what we're looking for. Yeah. And now the most important part is probably to make sure that what you want to search is included in that box. And before you go to search for the next thing, you forget to remove that. Yeah. If I want to next search when some had Saturn cross the 4th house cusp, I need to delete this and add the other one into the box. Otherwise, it's going to search for both of them.
First.
Yeah, makes sense, but just easy to miss something. Just play with it. If you have the software, just play with it, and it's going to become very easy when you just use it, I'm sure. And let's see, do we have any results now? Not yet. It's going slower because we have many things running at the same time, but it will get there. So, all right. Well, if any of you wants to say something or share something else for yourself, and then we'll come back to you some when this is done.
I just want to say that I can also do what Sam did. I don't need to, but I can also, I related the same way to the ages and knew the things that had happened during those times.
Right. Let's see your one just for a second and check how that compares to her case. Now I'm sure you see it. So here we have a situation with Saturn in the 3rd, but it's so close to the, I see that, I'm sure that the situation was similar related to family stuff. Is it, Raven?
Yeah, definitely family and marriages, relationships.
You see, isn't that interesting that when someone has it around the IC as a starting point, the first part of life delivers challenges related to relationships and to family.
Yes.
While other people are spared of that a bit, and their problems are in other areas. This is just another way to say houses are extremely important. And I know that this is just my opinion, but I really strongly urge anyone to pick very carefully what house system you're going to use for your work in general, because that's going to be so important when you want to make things personal for someone.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
here, I guess, you had almost the whole journey, Raven, of trouble before you
Yes.
hit the ascendant at some point. You
That's
must have
right.
been in your 20s. We see Saturn being down here. If we just go quarter by quarter, we know Saturn to the descendant, then to MC, then to ascendant. So we're looking at around age 21, 22, maybe 24, something like that. Around there was when it crossed the ascendant for the first time.
Okay.
Would
Yeah.
you say that you feel like you kind of became a bit more in control of Saturn?
I divorced in 21, the first husband that my mom set me up to marry. But on all the ages, like from almost all the ages up through 28, like starting at 6, were life death experiences at each point, at each age point. And the first marriage was at the one I divorced in 21. I was only 15 when my mother set me up to marry this person I didn't know really. So I won't go through the whole mess, but each year of the standard way you look at it did hit, for whatever reason, 3 times, or actually 4 life-death experience things. And the first one was at 6, but it wasn't my life death, it was my mom's. She actually died and came back in childbirth and lost the child. So that was that one, and then the rest were mine, 3 at each interval.
Mm-hmm. We see this big triangle in your chart pointing towards Pluto and Chiron in the 7th, and Saturn being part of the configuration. When you were about 7 years old, Saturn was squaring its natal place and was on the descendant. So this was, and it is supposed to be a very actional, waxing square, Martian, so violent maybe in some way, maybe I'm saying physical in some way, and Pluto Chiron involved. I think this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And your Saturn is part of a chart that as a whole is extremely intense
Okay.
and difficult. And it's not just any Saturn in the 3rd, 4th house. It's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's
It's true. It's true.
um
Yes, James.
Radalina.
Yes.
Yeah, I ran that search for Sam on my computer, and I got some dates if you want.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Mine is so slow that we better.
Okay, so
I think some disappeared though, James. Maybe she went stepped out for a second. Do you want to wait until she comes back? As I think she's the most interested in the dates.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You can also, if you're just interested in when it crosses the ascendant, for example, or any angle or other point in the chart, you can use the return feature in Solar Fire.
Yeah, that's another option. Yes, that's very.
Yeah,
very
this is very interesting when you do this for example, going through a house, because it does show you that it entered, it retrograded back out, it entered again, and then it entered the 2nd house, and then retrograded back to the first and exited again.
Yeah.
What's interesting?
So.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were
No,
done.
I was gonna say that Sam is back, but yeah, Lauren.
Well, I was just going to say it's almost an advertisement for getting solar fire, because with Astro, you can get a lot of things, but I don't think you can get this kind of detail except going through the ephemeris.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I haven't got the other one, but from my research, everyone is saying that if you really want to be having as many options as possible, this is the best currently existing. And I'm still exploring it, but yeah, I'm pretty impressed. I think it has a lot to be improved on in terms of graphics and how it looks and how user-friendly it is. But for what it is capable of doing, I'm totally like amazed how much it's capable of doing. So
What's interesting too is that Saturn's transit through Cancer is probably the fastest transit of any sign. So it
mhm.
spends less time in Cancer, more time in Sagittarius.
Right, that's interesting also to know, isn't it? That in some signs it's
Mhm.
more and in
Yeah.
others less.
Yeah,
But we
Saturn's
see that-
orbit is relatively circular, but there's enough of a ellipse to it that it doesn't spend the same amount of time in each sign.
Mhm. I guess what is more important for us is that it doesn't spend in the same time in each house. Because the signs are important, but personally, sometimes it just stays in one area of our chart. Like I have a huge 6th house and 12th house in my chart.
Mhm.
They are bigger than other houses. When Saturn transits them, I'm going to have almost twice the period of Saturn going to a sign in these houses than in other houses, where it just like goes through for a year and it's out of there. So James, you can say now if you want. James has the results quicker than me.
Oh, brilliant.
So
Oh, let's go back and find them. Here we go. Okay, it looks like Saturn entered your first house on October 5th of 2004. It retrograded back into the 12th on December 12th, and then went back into the first on June 16th of 2005, and then entered your second house August 31 of 2006, which in part is a result of you having a relatively small first house.
So
But it'll be
2005,
back.
6, is that it?
It will be back in 2034. You want those dates again?
Yes, please.
Oh, they're coming up
Okay.
here too. So I don't know if you can see them
If
on
you
the
get the same
screen.
dates.
Are they
That'd
the
be
same
interesting.
days? Oh, okay. I think I need to reshare with you because it's struggling to show many things at the same time. The search said like 50%, but we already have the first dates.
Let's do this the easy way.
You can catch up with later with the recording or whatever. But yeah, it's good because I think if you really want to study your present moment of something going on, you can see how these things fluctuate with the dates.
So what is this? Is this showing us when it crosses the ascendant? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, remember, Lauren, we decided to ask the program to only show us when it's going to cross the ascendant.
Okay.
And it's saying, okay, it crossed it. I mean, it really crossed it for the first time at October 5th, 2004, but then it went out of there. So presumably went back to the 12th. Is that right? In December. So only for 2 months it was in the first house. Then it went back and crossed again in January the next year. So basically, yeah, it is, I guess, to do
So I
with
would
Saturn
say to
getting.
her, do you know right now, for example, to make it more relevant for all of us, rather than just for you, what happened around October
1 second, someone's on my
2004?
front door. I'll be back. 1 second.
Yes, it's interesting to know what really happened at that time.
Because otherwise, how relevant is this except to see the process?
Yes,
But it would be interesting to see for each of us that times
yeah,
these exact times and then to calculate.
that's right. So if you want, we can do that, and everyone can have a bit of a say what you connect that year with. So for some, this is 2004, 2006 period kind of thing.
2004 was the year I got married. It was the year when I didn't want to get married, but that was the year I got married.
Okay.
So yeah,
Mhm.
it was in the August 2004. And then I think,
Was there something that happened that would enunciate 2006, August 14th, 2006, when it totally is done with that back and cross motion?
so I'm just wondering, I know around about that point was purchasing a house with my husband. Without looking at a calendar, I don't know for definite, but it was a couple of years after we got married, we then bought a house, and that's what tied me into the relationship for as long as I was there. That was kind of like cemented me and killed any chance of a quick getaway.
And around 2006 is when it went to the second house. So that ties in with the house, I guess.
Yeah.
Somehow. It is meant to be a period of rediscovering yourself or some sort of opening of new page. But what's really important with the ascendant is that it is conditioned by the transition of Saturn in the 12th. So it is, the idea is that when Saturn was in the 12th, before the crossing, it is almost like we're sitting at the threshold, and it's very difficult to step from one side to the other, because that's one of the most sensitive transitions from the dark to the light. And then the most depressive period, they say, is when it's in the 12th. So almost like the preparation to the crossing. So I guess we should look at clues about what was brewing in those couple of years before these years.
Yeah.
They must have been the hard years, really.
May I ask another question?
Sure.
And what was anything particular happened between, say, May 2010 and the end of 2000, or like March 2015, April 2015?
Nothing's jumping straight to my fore.
Was there a shift in anything?
That's the next one, is it, James? The next time.
During
This is something different.
During that
okay.
period, I did end up with, due to stuff going on, I did end up with an eating disorder. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly when it was, though. It's not something you make a list of. But
Okay.
during that period was a pretty shit time during being married, and I did end up with an eating disorder because of it. An addiction to the gym, an addiction to calorie counting, an addiction to carb counting, an addiction to protein, and everything. I counted so much stuff and was at the gym 4 or 5 times a day if I could get away with it.
Some do think that this is, sorry, go ahead.
There's an interesting phenomenon that happens because transiting Saturn and the secondary progressed moon move at about the same speed around the chart. And you can go through, there can be a period of time when the two of them kind of get locked in an aspect pattern that they dance in and out of over an extended period of time. Now, when it was going through your first house, they were dancing in and out of a sextile. But from May of 2010 through March of 2015, they were making a semi-square. So Saturn, transiting Saturn was semi-square your progressed moon. And Saturn moon transits can be rather challenging. So I was just curious. I like to think of it as a Saturn moon dance, but.
Yeah. You are getting to the moon question, where I was looking more at her moon in the first house by birth, and how Saturn is activating that when it goes to the first house. And you some were talking about eating disorders, anything to do with actual or metaphorical feeding, nurturing, has to do with the moon. We can see how stressed out your moon is with all those squares. So Saturn was not just crossing the ascendant in your case. We have somebody there, the moon, and the moon is already a bomb waiting to be activated. So we cannot say that we can expect something when the person has Saturn cross the ascendant, which is very specific. We can expect something, but depends what's going on in the first house, is it?
Yeah, what's happening is that during this period, the moon is gradually catching up to Saturn because of Saturn's transiting Saturn's switching between direct and retrograde motion. So it's interesting that you talked about buying your house and kind of getting yourself locked into this relationship for a while.
Yeah.
When there was a sextile, because this is my personal perspective on sextiles. There's a subtle aspect of them that can lead to a sensation of being trapped, which one may not be aware of. And it's only when you become aware of it that you're able to move out of it, if at all. And long story behind all of that. I got it from a astrophysics phenomenon that occurs. So it has to do with planetary gravitation and the like, but yeah. So you felt kind of trapped for a while.
Yeah, it was because I've not got any family at all. It was always the thing of, well, if I do leave, I've got nowhere to go, no one to help me, no support, nothing.
Did you even have you left?
Had family. Oh, I've left now. We broke up, but it still took me another 2 years to get out of that house.
That would have been about when then?
That was in my 30s. That was my Saturn return.
Saturn return.
That was the build up to it, realizing I couldn't carry on any longer, doing everything I could to just save every penny so that I could get out of there, and buying my own flat.
So that would have been.
That was my Saturn return. So,
2011, 2012, 2013, right after that.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, is during that period when you had the semi-square going on between Saturn and the moon. And like squares, semi-squares are times of hard or challenging, but the need to take some type of an action.
Yeah, I can remember sitting on the floor in the kitchen, having no money, eating a pot noodle that a friend from Birmingham had sent down for me so that I had food, because I had to buy new boilers and everything for the flat. But I remember sitting on the floor in the kitchen thinking, this is mine. I'm on my own and I have never been happier. And that was September, October in that time.
Yeah, and this would also be the balsamic moon phase then of the moon, the secondary progressed moon to transiting Saturn aspect or cycle. So it's a balsamic phase, which is that phase when it's like we have to decide if we're going to stay or go or change something or let go, what we're going to let go of. Preparation for the new cycle. Interesting. Some of this stuff actually works. Wow, fascinating. How fascinating.
It's always good when it comes together.
Always.
Saturn
Thank you for sharing.
In this chart, I don't know. There is in the table there is no aspect, but you can see how end of Libra is close to beginning of Scorpio. I think it's very close to when you had the return. During the return, a bit later than the return, like 32, 33 years old. The Saturn by transit was squaring the moon. And maybe if we argue that everything started from the 12th house and then the first and then the moon position in the first, It's kind of the story comes together in a way of getting away from this thing that's in the moon situation in the first place. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lauren.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is superficial because I don't have the real dates of the crossing of the ascendant or anything, but my Saturn is in my eighth. If you want
Yes.
another kind of life example, my Saturn is in Libra in the 8th house. So I was thinking the quality of the Saturn is going to be dissolution and having to start starting again. But in Libra, it's going to be the need to rebalance things. Also, so and then I was thinking my Saturn had it's very close conjunction with Neptune, and it's opposite a very close conjunction of Mars and Venus. But anyway, if I just go with Saturn and in Libra in the 8th house, that it would be something. And then when I look at my little chart, I can say that when I was 21, I left the mainland for I completely left the academic life. I had very strong academics until 21 in music as well as in math. And when I left, I went to Ibiza, Spain when I was 21. And that started I left my whole way of life of a mainland life in America because I was living rural without electricity, without plumbing. I was teaching at an international school there, so I was meeting people everywhere. But anyway, the whole idea is a new background and a completely different life. And then when I was between 28 and 30, I returned back. I left my European life and went back to the mainland. So it also then wiped everything clear there. And I married at 32 and then I moved from the East Coast where my parents were back to over to California and started a life with my husband and my 2 children at that point in California. And so that would be the that would be the waxing square. In the opposition, I divorced and lived alone at that 43, 44 time age. And then by 51, 52, I moved back. At that point, when I was 51, 52, I had left the mainland again, but went to live in Maui, Hawaii, and taught music there and performed there. But it was, again, a completely different life. And I lived in a house I shared and rented 3 parts of it. And I had a whole different kind of existence in Maui. And then when I was 58 to 59, I moved. That was the time I left Maui, and I moved back to the mainland to where I live now. And again, when you move, even though I've always kept music as my background, everything changed for me. All the circumstances of who would I work with and for, and what would be my everything changed the environment and so forth. And now if I look at the 64, 66, in that time period of certainly when I was 66, it was the beginning where all my performances have been changed because of the COVID thing that happened and shut everything down. And so I had, and now I'm looking at actually switching my location again. So I look at that as an interesting, quick examination of the Saturn cycles and how being in the 8th house, and also opposite this this Mars and Venus conjunct in Taurus, and the Saturn and Neptune conjunct in Libra, that there's the pattern of this whole dissolution of the background, even though that which is essential continues and finds a new way of expression.
Yes. Lauren,
So-
you gave me like a reason to maybe show you guys one more thing on your chart, how we can do it another maybe easier way, because we know it splits into 7-year periods, and we expect that Saturn will be moving from every point to the next point in this, like to the square, then to the opposition, the next square, and back. It will be moving from the same mode sign. So what am I talking about? Your Saturn is at the end of Libra. So we're looking at the cardinal signs. We are watching out. What else do you have around the end of the cardinal signs? Because we know that you are going to experience the first square of Saturn when Saturn is end of Capricorn. So you have Chiron there. Then we know that you are going to experience your Saturn oppositions when Saturn is at the end of Aries. You've got nothing there, but then beginning of Taurus is the Mars-Venus conjunction. Then next one is end of Cancer, is it? Yeah, end of Cancer. Then we just quickly jump from one end of the cardinal sign to the next, and we know that this is where Saturn will be at those moments. Does this make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's so easy to see how when Saturn transits the chart, what is it going to activate? How maybe in your particular case, we can argue that the most important transition points, or like the most eventful ones, would have been when it was a return or when it was a waxing square. Because on the return, you are activating pretty much a whole chart by hitting this and then the opposite and all the squares and everything. And at the waxing square, the first square after the return, you're having Chiron. Yeah, while the other two are still important, especially this one, but maybe not as eventful because no planet is actually sitting there.
Yeah, and we do have that Uranus at fit. Well, it's not at the end,
Yeah,
but it is.
it's close. Yes, Uranus is, just to say, for I know if you see the top of the tables here, but it's out of bounds, and it's the only planet in. No, actually, not the only planet. It's out of bounds, so I think it's interesting. No, it wasn't out of bounds. It's something else. Sorry, I'm mistaking. I'm confusing you here. There was something special about your Uranus. What was it?
Well, it's the ruler of my ascendant.
That's one thing, but Saturn is also the ruler of your ascendant, by the way.
True. Yes, of course. That's right.
Yeah. I don't know. There was something unusual about your Uranus, I think. But anyway, let's not delve into this right now.
Yes, but if I did get that exact dates, it would be interesting. But even with this, I was able to see a whole life change. Especially like you said, if I looked at 28 to 30, I moved back from Europe, and that whole European way of life and everything I was doing there back to the mainland at the first return, and at the second return, I had gone to the other side of the United States to Maui, and I was, although Maui and the Hawaiian Islands are the United States, it's a different feeling completely also. And then I returned back to the mainland at about 58 or 59.
Mm-hmm.
So I do see that it's huge. If you change your location, there's so much movement, and you do have to think about what's essential, what do I take with me, and what gets left behind.
And you are also an example of how whatever happens the first time when it crosses the ascendant, like whatever kind of event this was all about, this tends to repeat again and again many times during lifetime. In one of the books I was reading for today, they were giving an example that some woman was going through a health issue in the first time it crossed the ascendant. And then every time Saturn made an important aspect to itself, it was again coming back, that same illness or similar, and she needed to revisit. And it seems like you had to move every time you had a Saturn involved. But also, your Saturn is part of this cross of aspects, and anytime it does something, it activates everything else. So
Yes.
it's not very isolated like in other charts.
Yes, and I didn't go into it because I'm not going to take everyone's time. I just wanted to bring at least this one obvious thing of the change of location, and that changed with the job I got, how I worked with everything. And it also, that the opposition of it was the divorce at the 43, 44.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, so Evan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question because I think I still get mixed up about whether we're always talking about I don't know how to say it, the progressed ascendant or the actual natal ascendant, or the progressed Saturn or the natal Saturn.
No progression.
In secondary progressions, are those the same as regular progressions?
Regular progressions are the secondary progressions, but we're not even touching on them, Raven. Maybe we confused you a bit because we mentioned the progress moon at some point. And
no, you didn't
only
confuse me. I just am confused.
No, it's totally normal because, Saturn is so slow as a planet that by progressions, it doesn't move a lot. So it's almost never a factor in progressions. I mean, whatever we call the progress Saturn, we disregard this. So today we're not even, so yeah, you're right. It's when it crosses the natal ascendant. But we mentioned the progress moon at some point because it's so interesting, isn't it? That the progress moon, which is maybe the most important progressed thing to study and to follow, because it also changes sign every 2.5 years, like Saturn changes sign every 2.5 years. And it's funny because we can use these two factors in astrology that have nothing to do with one another. They're calculated in a completely different way. One is a transit, the other one is a progression, but they can be used together, hand in hand, to see what is the person going through emotionally, internally with the progress moon, what kind of temporary mood they are for those 2.5 years. And at the same time, what is Saturn doing for you and to you from the outside as an influence, as a pressure. And so I think it's good to remember that these two, and like James said, because they are moving in the same speed pretty much, sometimes they can lock into an aspect together and stay in it. One moves a little bit, the other one moves the same. One moves a little bit further, the other one moves the same. I hope that makes sense, but it's very interesting to use them together, I think.
And how also, about, I was going to ask one thing I noticed I am talking progress, but my progress Saturn is 1 degree Capricorn now. And so I was, in your earlier discussion, you said, well, when it changes not only the cusp of a house sign, but also it just changed this past birth. Now it's March, my birthday, but it changed into Saturn, into Capricorn.
That's a big thing. Actually, that's a big thing, and glad you mentioned it because even though I said we disregarded the right progression, not always. When you're older, you have more years behind you, you give a chance even to Saturn to move by progression significantly. And because your Saturn by birth is at the end of a sign, at the end, that means that over the course of several decades, it's probably going to go to the next sign by progression. And every time a planet goes to another sign by progression, it's a big deal.
And every so it's time. Just 1 degree of Capricorn this past birthday. So yeah, I thought that.
Oh, that couldn't be. That couldn't be.
No.
That's not, maybe you're thinking about Scorpio, not Capricorn.
No.
Well, okay, then I'm looking at
because it can only move a couple of degrees, several degrees per lifetime, basically. And if it's at the end of Libra, it can maximum go beginning of Scorpio.
No, actually, it's retrograde, so it's gone back to 20 Libra.
Okay, yeah, it's around that area basically, all life
Yeah.
long.
I wonder what I'm looking at then. This is a directed solar arc for,
Oh,
Ah,
that's
this is solar
different.
arc. That's a different story altogether.
okay, sorry then.
We got very
Yeah.
mixed up with different techniques, and I'm afraid if someone is watching
yeah.
this, they're gonna say, "What are these guys talking about? This is too much
Okay, okay.
mixing of techniques and
Yes.
so on." But if this is the case, you
Mhm.
can go and look at my channel, and where all these sessions are stored, the free ones from last year. And if you want something like a I don't know, refreshment about progressions, there is one about progressions. There is about something about solar arc too. So
Okay, I'll look at
a separate session. So maybe that would give more clarity what all of these
Thank you.
things are. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, well, we are approaching the end, and time flies today, doesn't it?
Yep, time is very interesting lately in life. It seems to be like, how did we get to be another week already?
Mhm.
Saturn.
Radeline, I have a technical question real quick.
Yes.
When you do Zoom and you open your solar fire, do you have to open your solar fire first and then Zoom, or Zoom and then
No.
solar fire?
You can open them in whatever order you want, but it's just when you start sharing your screen, sometimes you need to be careful what exactly you're sharing, because there is only one option that allows to, when I change something on my site, what I see page, for you to see the same. I always need to, tell Zoom again, no, share that, not this,
Oh,
which is a
okay.
bit annoying, but maybe I haven't learned how to really play with it well.
I'm amazed that you can do that.
It's easier than it looks.
I hope so.
One time I can
someone
show
is.
you if you want.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay.
And I
well,
apologize for getting confused with that.
no problem. That's a good reason to get clarified. So
Yes.
Okay,
other
thank you.
people are needing this, so that's fine. That's fine, Lauren.
All right.
Well, I hope it was interesting for you today. And shall we continue with other planets like this? Look at
Sure.
transits and cycles.
May I throw something out to the
Yeah.
group? Okay, so a friend of mine and I run the Santa Monica Astrology Meetup group here in Los Angeles area. And we normally have a Zoom meetup the second Sunday of every month. So this coming Sunday, we're going to be talking about Chiron.
Great. Can we join?
But from a somewhat different perspective, I think, because our title is Chiron More Than the Wounded Healer.
Okay.
So
Very interested.
there's so much more to Chiron than that concept of the wounded healer.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to focus on.
Yes.
And if you like, I will post a link, a Zoom link. It's free, to one of your Facebook pages.
Yes.
For anybody who wants
Are you guys
check
all
it
on
out.
the Facebook pages? The Dane Rudier one and the Psychological Astrology Students and Friends?
The Dane
how-
Richter one is
I-
definitely.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Redline, and you can put it wherever you want to.
Okay, that
Put
would
it,
be great,
so to
James. Text it to me. I would post about it, and you just give me the whole wording you want, whatever. I'll just post it on your behalf, and we
All right.
can invite
Yeah,
everyone.
and I want to thank you because I learned something about solar fire today, even though I've been using it for a long time. Because I've never used little binoculars for the election research, the election search. I've always done just the chart search for something, but yeah, I'd never used that election research feature with the binoculars. That's
Good.
quite
I'm
interesting.
glad. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't use any tutorials for this program. I just opened everything around it and tried to see what it can do. And
That's
maybe
great.
I have so many things I don't have an idea about yet, but
Yeah.
maybe
Wow.
one time we can make a workshop for solar fire. And
That would be great. That would
Yeah,
be
because there's
great.
a new, what is it, Solar Fire 10 coming out
Is it? Okay.
sometime
Is it only
in
for
the near
Windows, by
future.
the way?
And I would also say thank you for having a better Wi-Fi connection this week.
Oh,
You said
well,
your
that's the
person,
minimum I can do, is
Hey.
it?
well, your
Nothing.
person really made it. It worked really well today.
Yes, well, we had to change the router, even though they didn't
Yes.
change the whole thing that they were supposed to. It was a bit
Yeah.
disappointing because they were supposed to have a brand new, how is it called, optical, or forgive me, I'm not aware of these things, but it was supposed to be a very powerful new connection. And they came and they said, well, I'm sorry, but there are reasons we can do it. So at least we managed to get the router changed, but I can see
It's
an
so much
improvement.
better. So much better.
Thank you, Lauren. It was such a
And-
difficult time
2
last time,
ago.
was it?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Let's leave that behind. Let's forget about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
wanted to
everybody.
say
Thank you,
And
everybody.
before we say goodbye next week, next
Yeah.
time, sorry, not next week, in 2 weeks, but what would you prefer to do? How about Uranus? Or maybe
Yeah,
Jupiter?
Uranus will be great.
Uranus? I was
Yes.
thinking it will naturally
Sure.
lead us to Uranus, yeah?
Mhm.
Yeah.
2 weeks, right?
To
Into-
always every second
Always
week.
2 weeks. Okay.
Yes.
Are you doing second and fourth Thursdays, or how are you doing that? Or just every other Thursday?
Every other, but I think, let's say, I think it's second and last.
Because that
Because that's
way,
how we started.
some
So
months
that's
might be
going to
3. I was just curious.
The 23rd.
23rd.
The 23rd of September.
That's right.
Ah, yes. Remember, no, that was the 5th of November.
And then it's going to be the 7th of November. Oh, sorry, 7th of October. And 21st of October.
Okay.
If all is well.
Sounds like a plan. We'll work our way out and start on the inside or something, or work some magic. So
I'm going
Alexandra, good fortune with your upcoming Saturn return.
Mhm.
They're not as bad as they seem to be. I remember my first, well,
Depends.
wasn't my first one, but my age 29 one was actually worked out quite well. It was a positive one. Actually, both of them did.
Well,
The second one is nice because it coincides with your 5th Jupiter return, so don't sweat it so much.
Oh, that's interesting. I
Does
think
it
if you
not
prepare
depend,
for
James,
it,
how
it's not
does
as
it not depend
shocking.
how much of a friend you are with Saturn in the first place? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you are pretty good with Saturn.
Though I would point out, Alexander, that you are currently in a progressed moon opposing transiting Saturn phase. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could feel it. This year's been really emotional too, about boundaries and about discipline and everything. Yeah.
well, get used to it. It's going to last until June of 22. Got a
Okay,
couple. You
nice.
got
Thank
another
you.
year to go.
I'll deal with that. Thank
Oh,
you.
how fun!
Thank you, everyone. By the way, it was amazing for the first time. I'll definitely come back.
Yes, thank you everybody for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank
Me
you,
too.
everyone.
And
Thank you, Madeline, for doing this.
I
Yes,
just
thank
will
you.
finish with one last thing that you led me to. Well, you see here in London, it's 6:30 in the evening, the sun rises. This is unusual, isn't it? That's why the light
Yeah.
so much. But yeah, we're almost at the end. I just wanted to say I've discovered recently that following the Sabian symbols of your progress moon is very interesting exercise. So as it goes to the next one every month. So every month, one Sabian symbol. And if you consider your situation in the month, you probably will find lots of similarities to the symbol. And I've been following that for over a year now, and it's really interesting. And you can see how they lead to one another and how you are in a process of discovering something internally, which is very interesting, I think. If you want to experiment. Today we were talking about so many different ways to play with the chart and investigate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye for now. Take care.
Bye.
Stay